Okay, why don't you come on up? Come on up. Okay, we're gonna get started. Okay, we're gonna get started, and we're gonna do a sound check. Come on up. Joseph, come on up here. Joseph, I want you right here. Pat, right there. Okay, come on up. Mike, get over there. All right, come on in tight. First, to all the survivors of sexual abuse across this state, deep gratitude for the courage that each of you have demonstrated in now coming forward and sharing your secret and your experience with us and these advocates, because it is because of you and your courage that the law in New York has now created an opportunity for survivors of sexual abuse to be able to take action in a way you never had before. And so gratitude first to all the survivors that can, and to honor those that are no longer able and with us. I'm Jeff Anderson. I stand here today with some courageous survivors, and also with my colleagues and lawyers working with us across this state, and particularly downstate today, to detail that as of this morning, we have filed downstate against the Archdiocese of New York, the Diocese of Brooklyn, and Rockville Center, a total of 109 cases. And across the state, our firms have filed a total of 262 cases against the Catholic bishops and the Catholic diocese in New York. Why could the survivors do this, and why could we stand with them at this important time in New York? Because the Child Victims Act was passed into law. The Catholic bishops for 20 years have been in opposition to that and lobbying against it, spending tens of millions of dollars in opposition to opening up the courthouse doors and shining light upon their serious and dangerous practices. Survivors have an opportunity to not only have their voice, but have their voice heard, and through a public forum, and can file these cases as Jane Does and John Does, but also identify the perpetrators, the offenders, and those that allowed them to commit offenses. Today, we announce the filing of the cases against the Catholic bishops in downstate New York. And here, because we have felt for so long they have hidden in the shadows and adhered to secrecy, and for so long survivors, after working in this area for 30 years, are now given a voice and a chance and hope like never before, and through the Child Victims Act. And so it was a lot of survivors that worked hard to get that passed. And I'd like Bridie Farrel to come forward, a New York Love Kids, a survivor who worked very hard among so many to get this passed. Bridie Farrel, tell us what this means to you as a survivor and what this means for child protection in New York today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bridie Farrel. I'm CEO and co-founder of New York Loves Kids, a nonprofit based here in New York. 2,319 days ago, my abuser admitted in the Chicago Tribune to abusing me as a minor. And New York State said there was nothing that could be done, which left this person on the streets in our communities, whether it's a skating rink, a church, or a school. Well, today, survivors like me and so many of us across New York can come forward and file a lawsuit to hold our abusers accountable and any institution that allowed this to happen. Right now, what we're saying is we have identified 26 perpetrators just in downstate in the diocese that we're talking about today. This is a huge day where finally people that have been able to hide in the darkness and to abuse children are no longer able to. That a light is being shown upon them, and our voices as survivors is finally being heard. And yes, it's justice for me, and it makes me feel good, but at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's about my daughters and my sons and my nieces and my nephews and your daughters and your sons. And that's why so many survivors have worked tirelessly over almost 15 years. And I want to thank all the attorneys that have helped us do this, as well as the Governor Cuomo, who helped pass this legislation.
Bridie, Farrel, thank you so much for your advocacy and your voice as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and as a former athlete. Joseph Caramanno, please step forward. First, Joseph Caramanno came to us some months ago. And at that time, Joseph reported to us that he had been sexually abused and violated by a trusted priest. Right here he is, right here. Where is he? Right here. Monsignor John Paddock. And at the time that he reported this violation of trust and the abuse of him by Monsignor John Paddock was in ministry in the Archdiocese of New York. Archbishop Dolan had him in ministry. And at that point in time, Archbishop Dolan had not released the names of offenders in ministry who had been abused kids, and claimed that there were none in ministry in the entire Archdiocese. We also knew that Archbishop Dolan had not released a list of those who had been accused or credibly accused. And after Joseph came to us and we did our investigation and realized that Paddock was in ministry and he wasn't the only one in ministry in the Archdiocese, we knew we had to act. So we assembled a list called the Anderson List. And we released this report and this list, and it's posted online. And it identifies not just Paddock as publicly accused of childhood sexual abuse, but every other publicly accused priest who has worked or is working in the Archdiocese of New York, publicly accused of childhood sexual abuse. Dolan did not remove Paddock at the time we released the list, and we demanded his removal. As a result of Joseph Caramanno coming forward, when we did release this list, 7 other survivors of Monsignor Paddock have come forward. And so today, Joseph stands with us, using his name, having filed under the Child Victims Act, and one of the courageous survivors that has taken action. And he chose to use his name even though he did not have to. So Joseph, please step forward and in gratitude share with us how you're feeling today.
I am Joseph Caramanno. I was molested by Father John Paddock, 2001-2002 at St. Joseph by the Sea High School. Today is very important. It's a big day. And I want to thank everyone, not only folks that are up here with me, but my friends and family who have really shown me a lot of support. A place that I am at right now, I never thought I would be able to be at in the past. Today is important. That was a very dark time in my life. 16, 17 years old, it was very dark. And this is that light. This is the light. Today is the day of the light. Today is the day of the truth. And today is the day that I reclaim the trust that was lost when I was younger. Today is the day that I reclaim the love that was lost. And the days going forward, I hope and pray that I'm able to express love and trust in ways that I have not been able to before. And I am very grateful for all those that made this possible. And I continuously hope and pray that no priest ever is able to abuse a child within the Archdiocese of New York. And I thank you for your help getting that to be the reality.
Joseph, in gratitude and symbolism to all the survivors with whom we have this chance to work, may I give you a hug?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not a person that likes to hug.
I know, that's why I asked permission, because we always do. Every survivor that has brought this action today and has now been allowed to shine this light and have this voice, every Jane Doe, every John Doe, of the 262 cases that we've filed across the state against the Catholic bishops and the 109 cases that we've filed now downstate as of this morning deserve credit for their courage, because you, survivors, are the ones, through your truth and through your voice and now through this law, that is shining the bright spotlight on the dark and dangerous practices so long employed by Catholic bishops in failing to protect the kids the way the kids deserve to be protected. So it is a new day. It is a new time. And it's time. It's time for the truth to be revealed. It's time for the survivors to stand up as Jane Does and John Does, and a few to use their name if they so choose, as Joseph did, but mostly those that need to just share the secret and take some action, knowing that kids will be better protected, and employing the Catholic Diocese and the bishops to work with us instead of against us, and engaging with us instead of against us, in doing everything that can now be done and will be required to be done under the law that was never required to be done under the law before. And that is, come clean, speak truth, protect kids, release the files, which we will require in litigation, release all the names of all the offenders you know about, which we will require in litigation. And as we do share this journey with so many survivors across this state and downstate here in New York, we work from a place of deep gratitude and great hope and promise for a better day and a safer day. So, Pat Stoneking, please step forward. You're with a national firm that has teamed up with us. Please introduce yourself and what this means today to be a part of this team and this journey.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Pat Stoneking. I'm with the firm of Robbins Kaplan LLP, and I can't tell you all how much it means to me to stand here with someone like Joseph and the rest of the survivors that we represented. For Joseph to stand up here like he did and speak his truth about what happened to him, and to spread his word, and for people to see that and to say that happened to me too. And in the face of people saying that it didn't happen or that this perpetrator didn't say that sort of thing, it's the most rewarding thing to be able to stand with someone like that and to represent them and to help push their case along, like we did for Joseph today and 108 other people downstate. We filed 109 cases downstate just today, just this morning already, against the Diocese of the Archdiocese of New York, Brooklyn Diocese, and Rockville Center in Long Island. And to represent people like that in such a battle is what my firm and what I believe in, and it couldn't make us prouder. And I thank you all for being here, and I thank you, Joseph, for standing up. Thank you.
And Pat Stoneking is one of the principals with the firm of Robbins Kaplan. Why do they stand with us here today in this journey? Because they are a firm of national prominence with enormous resources to help us and help the survivors both get the help and expose this. And our firm has been doing this nationally for 37 years, but we also knew that as this opened up, we needed real heavy-duty firepower and legal talent to help back us up and our team, as good as we are and as big as we've become. And they bring to bear litigation experience across this country and in downstate New York that can help us not only protect every survivor who reaches out to us, but they can help us in major litigation against these institutions that have made the wrong choices in the past and help us do what needs to be done, and that is a massive cleanup. That is a massive cleanup. So deep gratitude to the law firm of Robbins Kaplan for taking this on and sharing in this journey in full partnership with the survivors in the Archdiocese of New York, in Brooklyn, in Rockville Center, and we are grateful for what you and this. What a day. What a day. Mike Reck, please step forward. You're a lawyer that's been working with our firm and advocating with and for survivors of sexual abuse in New York and across the country. Tell us what it is you think is important about today and where we go from here.
Thanks, Jeff. Again, my name is Mike Reck. I'm an attorney with Jeff Anderson and Associates. And what we have to recognize today is really two important facts and two important effects of the Child Victims Act, which has effectively catapulted New York to the forefront of child protection. What this new law does is, number one, it brings out information, exposure, and accountability that these institutions have been unable and incapable of doing. Institutions like the Catholic Church, institutions like the Boy Scouts of America, institutions like the private schools here in Manhattan, the day camps, the tutors, the scholars, the teachers, all of those individuals and those institutions can now be held accountable. This can be done in the courts in a very safe and very empowering way. The second important effect of the Child Victims Act, which cannot be overlooked. We started this talk at 9:30 this morning on the first day of the effectiveness of the Child Victims Act. The numbers that Jeff spoke about, the survivors that are here today, are just the very first ones. As this law becomes effective in the coming days, the coming weeks, and the coming months, additional survivors will come forward from these other institutions, and they will be protected by the Child Victims Act as well.
You know, it's time. It is time. That's why we got the number 1-800-ITS-TIME. So survivors can call 1-800-ITS-TIME to know that it's time for your truth and your voice to be heard and shared privately and secretly. It's time for you to have the chance to have the courthouse doors open to you in a way in New York you never have before. It's time for those institutions that have made the wrong choices to be held accountable, and those offenders who are in the community and or have offended to be exposed. It's time for that truth and that peril to be revealed. And today we filed along with Robbins Kaplan, just downstate, against the Archdiocese of New York, 54 cases that identify 13 new perpetrators whose names have never been public before. Why? Because they're now in the lawsuit and named in the lawsuit. Did you hear that? 13 names of clerical offenders who worked in the Archdiocese who have now been publicly accused of child and sexual abuse in the Archdiocese of New York alone. 13. A total of 27 named in the lawsuits filed this morning in the Archdiocese of New York. In Brooklyn, 36 cases have been filed by our firms. 36 in Brooklyn, naming 9 new perpetrators. Clerical offenders who worked in New York who have never before been identified as child molesters. And of the cases in Brooklyn, 18 perpetrators are identified in the lawsuits themselves. And also in downstate New York, Rockville Center, 19 cases filed this morning by our firms, Robbins Kaplan and our firm. And of that, there are 26 total new names of priests who worked and now stand publicly accused in these Jane Doe and John Doe lawsuits that have been brought as offenders. Yeah.
Again, Mike Reck with Jeff Anderson and Associates. And as we look at these numbers, sometimes the numbers don't show us the details, the stories that are important. The Diocese of Brooklyn was brought to bear a claim of sexual abuse by one of its priests by the name of Monsignor Otto Garcia. In response to this claim, in response to hearing that survivor who came forward before the Child Victims Act, when the courthouse doors were still closed, the Bishop of Brooklyn and the Diocese of Brooklyn refused to take action. That survivor's case against Monsignor Garcia was filed this morning, and a second case naming Monsignor Otto Garcia as an alleged perpetrator was filed. These cases bring about accountability. These cases demand that the institutions like the Diocese of Brooklyn take the action that it could have and should have taken before.
Now, 2 cases filed against Otto Garcia, a top official in the Diocese of Brooklyn, who remained as of last night in a position of ministry, and the bishop having not yet removed him. 2 cases filed against him for childhood sexual abuse, and he remains. And that really illustrates the peril. Across the state, as of this morning, our firms have filed 262 cases against the Catholic bishops across the state of New York. This is a journey that just begins, with survivors sharing their secret, knowing that their privacy can be protected, but also knowing that it's time for them to stand up, because it's time for your truth to be heard and your story to be believed. And for you, survivors, to know you're not alone. And the law can now protect you and your identity, but will no longer protect the offenders and those that chose to protect them the way they have in the past. The Catholic bishops for 20 years have been lobbying against statute of limitations reform. It was reported they spent over $10 million opposing the Child Victims Act. More recently, it's time. One question is why is it you're only focused today on the Catholic bishops in New York and downstate as we stand with these courageous survivors and others today? Because for so many years we have known there has been a systemic failure to come clean and to speak the whole truth. And because of that, the peril has been so grave and so widespread, we made the conscious choice to put our first attention under the Child Victims Act on the Catholic bishops and those practices. We work with survivors across the country and across New York in violation of an abuse of trust by Boy Scout leaders and other authority figures. And the bottom line is this law now gives survivors a chance of all kinds to now expose their offender in any institution that chose to protect that offender. And we're grateful to them. It's time. We're grateful to Joseph and Bridie and to the survivors that stand with us today and have stood with us throughout this journey here in New York. It took courage. It takes truth. And it's time for us to honor what has been and make sure that what has been will no longer be, because it requires action, rigor, vigor, truth, and courage. And also, survivors need to know that we, and the law allows you to be protected and your identities to be protected, so that if you choose to come forward, you can do so as a Jane Doe and a John Doe, and hold those accountable that made the wrong choices and conscious choices to allow harm to be done or to hurt you. So thank you to all of those. And Bridie, Farrel.
I just want to say a few things directly to any survivors out there that are watching or listening, and that is, when I tell my story, people will tell me you're brave or you're courageous. And I ask that everyone who says that to stop for a second. Because why are you saying that? I'm 37 years old and I'm telling you about something that happened 20 years ago, and you're telling me I'm brave today? Then recognize the hypocrisy in expecting a child to speak up. And so for everyone out there that has been through something like I've been through, finally, you can come forward and you can have people listen to you. That people are understanding the position we're in as survivors. And so I will be the first to tell anyone that it is not fun is an understatement, that it's horrible to stand up here and tell you about being molested 100 times, but I'll do it 100 times more if it means to protect one other kid. And as Jeff stands up here and talks about the Catholic Church, what if every organization shared this information? I was abused in 1997 and 1998. Not until I came public was a FOIA request made that we had documentation that my abuser was raping people in 1990. That's in sports. This isn't an attack on the Catholic Church. This isn't anti-Catholic. This is anti-crime. And as much as people also, I want to let folks know that there's a lot of commercials out there about the Child Victims Act going into law. And I hope that everyone hears and listens to these commercials, because they're spreading the information that finally we have time and we have the ability to speak. And while I thank so many survivors for coming forward, I also want to thank that the trailblazer attorneys who have put their necks out to make this possible. $10 million was funded against us to not do this. That's insane. That's insane. I quit my job to focus on this bill. I went on food stamps and Medicaid, and that's what it takes in this country to have a bill like this be passed. And it takes people like Jeff Anderson and Associates, for as long as I've been alive, not to date you, but as long as I've been alive, he's been working on this, right? So it is a new time that we're in. And for everyone that has felt alone for so long, call 1-800-ITS-TIME. Honest to God, call me. I will help you find someone. Someone in my own family asked me if I had yet asked Jesus Christ for forgiveness for not walking away from being molested at 15. So I get it. I get how our families and our communities aren't willing and ready to hear this information, but keep saying the truth. Because over time, that same person who asked me that came back 6 years later and said, what could I have done differently? This is what we can do different. We can speak up. We can help each other. I thought I was the only person. And sadly, I'm not. I'm here with Joseph. I'm here with so many of you. And so on this day that is a game changer in our lives, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are molested by the time they're 18. Let that sink in. The world stopped to hashtag me too. What about hashtag kids too? So it is time for everyone to dig within themselves and get the strength and the courage to come forward. And there are people to help you, and there are people to listen.
Thank you. And one last note, and I think it's really important, because Bridie Farrel and Joseph Caramanno stand before us, and among the survivors with whom we work, and on whose behalf we've now filed suit, and on whose behalf we'll be filing suit, they are among the youngest. Because the reality is that survivors of sexual abuse by trusted authority figures, be they coaches, teachers, or clerics, suffer in silence and secrecy and shame, thinking they are and you are the only ones, and you can't do anything and you won't be believed. Well, you can do something and you will be believed. And so most of the survivors with whom we work and on whose behalf we filed suit today with Robbins Kaplan are in their 70s, in their 60s, and in their 50s, and in their 40s. And most of the abuse that has been the subject of this now excavation and public disclosure through these filings is abuse that actually began decades ago. But the practices and the patterns employed by the institutions that have been sued today are in place today. And so it's not just about exposing the offenders, it's about exposing the practices that allowed the offenders and caused the survivors to suffer in secrecy and silence and shame for decades. It's time. Thank you, survivors, and thank you to the legislature and the governor for giving survivors hope, promise, and a chance to take action to protect others and recover power.
One more thing, I promise.
Okay.
So many times after I speak, people come up to me afterwards and ask, and this is usually grown men in their 60s and 70s, asking me, telling me what happened to them, and asking Bridie, this is what happened to me in a bathroom at a rest stop. Was I sexually abused as a child? So for anyone that's wondering, don't self-diagnose, don't WebMD this, right? If you think that maybe you were sexually abused as a child, pick up the phone and call someone that's willing to help and willing to listen. We're not alone anymore. If you pick up the phone and call, someone will help you navigate these waters. Someone will help you understand that what happened to you was wrong. So don't try and self-justify. Don't try and build your own case and find your own evidence. No. There are people that are willing and able to help us. So I encourage everyone to find the strength within and to reach out and call.
Thank you all. Questions? Yes, sir.
Total number of clergy accused. Can you give us a sense? Do you know how many were ever prosecuted, convicted, or defrocked?
The question is how many were actually prosecuted, convicted, or defrocked
Of the total 160.
of the 162 named in these suits? I don't have that data, but I can tell you a small fraction. That would be a handful were prosecuted, because most of these crimes go unreported and uninvestigated, and as a result, the statute of limitations expires, and when reported years later, there's nothing that can be done, and so only a handful of those get prosecuted, and even less get removed from the clerical state, or as you say, defrocked. The Catholic bishops make conscious choices to protect the offenders and oftentimes protect the reputation, and as a result, rarely remove the offenders, even when they know they've offended, from the clerical state. That's a practice that we think needs to be addressed, and so a handful of these new offenders named that we know, none have been prosecuted to date. But it is our hope that as a result of these civil actions, as a result of these cases that are being brought and these names being brought forth across the state and across the communities, there will be prosecutions. Because when a new law opened up in California in 2002, in which we were involved, as a result of that one-year window, 250 new offenders were exposed that had never been before exposed. 250 across the state of California in 2002. So I expect, and we expect, we now have an opportunity to expose risks in the community never before investigated.
Do you know how many are still in ministry today?
The ones in ministry today are Otto Garcia, and Paddock was removed or resigned just a few weeks ago, and right now as we speak, what about Timon? Is Timon?
Timon is not today.
Okay.
Probably some others, but we don't know.
Right now, the only one that we know is in ministry today is the one we named is Otto Garcia. But as we learn about more in ministry and as we file more claims moving forward with survivors, we make that known. We alert the police, we alert the diocese, and we alert the public, and we will continue to do that, armed with the courage of the survivors. Yes?
How cooperative do you think the various archdioceses or organizations will be? One of the latest statements we got at WNBC from the New York Archdiocese was that it's vigorously investigating all of the claims against its priests. So how well do you think they're going to respond to the lawsuits?
Well, the question is, how well do I expect the Catholic Diocese to respond to this? And I have been an adversary with survivors across the country, and I think this is a new time and a new day, and I think the Catholic bishops and every single one of them now recognize that's an opportunity. And we don't have to dwell on what has been, but we have to be rigorous about unearthing what has been. And I actually believe today that given the heat, given the light, that they are going to change the way they have handled this. And they have already sent signals that they are willing to accept service of process, that they are willing to communicate and cooperate with us as we bring these cases forward, that instead of fighting and pushing back, they're willing to at least start to engage in a way they never had to engage before because the law requires it, and they have already demonstrated to me and to us that there is a change in tone, and that gives me some hope. I don't expect dramatic changes from them. I think it's the heat, and I think it's the light brought upon them by the survivors through the media across the country and in New York that really brings this change. But I believe that they are open, and they are going to be, if not willing, required. And I implore them to work with us and the survivors to bring resolution and to help begin the healing, and to work with us in protecting kids and exposing their deep and their dark secrets held in those files yet to be excavated, which we will. And they know we have, and they know we will. Yes, sir.
This is day one. You've got 262 cases. I assume your firms have looked at the future and extrapolated. How many cases do you think will be filed, limited to New York, within the next year?
We've been working in New York and getting calls and reports investigating from survivors in New York for decades. And because we've filed 262 today, the question is, how many more do we expect to come? The answer is, we don't know. But what we do know is we're ready to help. We know that the law allows survivors to come forward, and we know there are so many more and so much more work to be done. But this is a time of great hope and great promise and great rigor. And so we stand with the survivors to that end. Thank you all.